Do you think there's an opportunity for basically anyone anywhere to start a flower farm, or are there like geographic kind of restrictions on how well this would work for someone?
I think that if you have a desire to grow flowers, you can grow flowers.
Hmm.
Now, you might not be able to grow dahlias everywhere. I was having a conversation with someone about how in California, if you have a backyard and you want to be a backyard flower farmer and you have a severe drought and water issues, growing dahlias might not be the best flower. But there are drought tolerant flowers that you could still grow and start a flower farm. I've heard of flower farmers growing on rooftops in the San Francisco area. So, regardless of whether you have a large field or a small backyard, if you want to start a flower farm, you can. You just need to learn what grows in your area. So know your growing zone.
Hmm.
So your growing zone tells you your first and last frost dates of what you can plant that's hardy in your zones. If you pay attention to that, start looking at those flowers that you could plant in your zone. So if you're in zone 2, you might have different flowers that you can grow than if you're in a zone 10. In zone 10, you can grow a lot of things year round, where even me, I'm a zone 7, 8. I can't start planting out any of my annuals until May.
Hmm.
But so within my growing zone, I have to look at what flowers I can grow. But yes, a long answer to your question. I think that if you want to start a flower farm, regardless of where you are, as long as you grow specific flowers to your area, you can totally do it.
I would almost say that if you're growing in an area where like it's harder to, the fact that if you pull it off, you might be the only person in town even giving it a shot. And so that
Absolutely.
might be a good place to be. I am officially a dahlia grower as of last season 2023, and I planted about 50 different types of dahlias. Maybe I'll tell you kind of what I did, and you let me know if that was even a good idea. So I
Okay.
got a bunch of tubers from I believe it was Brex last year, and basically just planted them in this 20 by 20 square foot area of the garden, um, with kind of the clump of tubers with the stem sort of facing upwards, maybe 4 to 6 inches deep, and then just kind of just let those be. And they came up, and it was actually incredible last year. Just insane amount of dahlias, all the different types you could imagine. And then when the season ended, I just cut them back or let them die off and forgot about them. I don't know if that was even the right thing, and maybe we could just kind of go into the general process here.
Sure. Well, growing dahlias definitely differs from growing region to growing region. They are an incredible flower. I personally say that everyone should grow dahlias. If you can find a space in your garden, grow a dahlia and watch it grow. It's amazing. So, dahlias get planted after your last season ending or your last season frost date. So for me, that's May 1st. So I always use Mother's Day as a rule of thumb for planting. So some people in the US are already able to plant. Depending on growing zones, they may be waiting. For you, you're probably well past your
Yeah.
last frost date.
Yeah. We don't have one
'Cause
technically. So yeah.
you don't have one. Okay. So you are a little bit more fortunate than me. You mentioned leaving yours in the ground. Where I live, you mentioned offline that you had driven through our area in an ice storm. Had I left mine in the ground during that ice storm, I would have lost all 2,000 of my dahlias.
Yeah. And you've been growing
So
those for 4 years, multiplying your stack, right?
some of them I've had for over a decade.
Oh, wow. Wow.
I've been growing for a long time.
Yeah. 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 That would be a catastrophic loss. And so you
It
have
would
to
be
dig them up in what, maybe in October-ish or so?
our last frost was end of October this last year. So I spent November digging our dahlia tubers and storing them for the winter time. And then I spent February and March dividing them for our annual tuber sale.
Wow. And okay, so let's come down to the backyard home gardeners level. They want to get into dahlias
Yes.
like this year. Where should they even get them from? Obviously, you sell some, but are there like resources in general, like things to avoid, things to not avoid?
Absolutely. I always recommend that people find a local dahlia grower in their area. I truly believe that if you find someone selling dahlias in a similar climate to yours, that the dahlia tubers will perform better in their first year. And there's two ways you can really buy dahlias. Well, what I mean by that is you can either go to a big box store like a Home Depot or Lowe's, buy a bag of dahlias. those dahlia tubers are imported, likely from Holland.
Hmm.
And so they are going to be in a clump, meaning that they have not been divided out. All the tubers from last year's plant are still attached, and you're going to see that stalk.
Hmm.
Typically, when you buy from a US grower, that grower has taken their clump out of the ground. And as we mentioned on a previous episode, that one tuber that they had planted the previous year has become 3 to 10 tubers. And when they divide that, they can sell each tuber as long as it has a viable eye, which I always joke, it kind of looks like a pimple
Hmm.
on the crown of the tuber. And that is where the new growth is going to occur. So you can go, a lot of farmers will have online tuber sales. You can join your local Dahlia Society, and a lot of them, especially in the spring, have Dahlia tuber sales. That's a great way to buy Dahlia tubers if you're getting started. There's a website called Dahlia Addict that lists a ton, not all, but a ton of the Dahlia growers. Our sale is already over for the season. Dahlia mania is a true thing. We sold out within a day of
Wow.
almost all varieties. So those are some ways that you can initially purchase your tubers or trade with a friend.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, once you get into the game, I guess trading is probably one of the better ways to do it, just swapping tubers around. Okay. So you've already highlighted something I did. Well, you tell me if I did this wrong or not, but I got the clump style and they weren't divided out and I didn't divide them. I just put them in like that. Was that bad or was that okay?
Not at all. So when you buy a clump from a big box store, a lot of times, a lot of those necks are broken. So a lot of those individual tubers, if you were to divide them out, wouldn't even be viable to grow. So that's kind of why they leave them all clumped together. And a lot of times they get broken in that transit from Holland to the US. So for you, planting that clump, totally fine. And if a backyard grower lifts their clump and puts it back in the ground, they can replant that again. The thing is that original tuber that grew the plant is called the mother tuber. That tuber will start to rot over time. It may not rot in the first year, but a lot of times it will because it puts all of its energy into creating the baby or new tubers. So if you divide your plant, I will always cut off the end of the mother and see if it's rotting on the inside. If it's not, I'll reuse it again the following year. I never sell the mother tuber though because its production is decreasing. But all of those baby or new tubers can be planted individually. And so each one of those will send up a shoot. The difference is a clump might give you more branches in your first year. So you might have a few more flowers, but there's nothing wrong with planting a clump or an individual tuber. You'll get a beautiful plant either way.
Okay, good. Yeah, that's good. That's good to know. So then if you were to divide out off of the mother, and then plant a baby tuber, that then becomes the mother of that plant for the next season, right?
Absolutely. Yes.
Okay, interesting.
And the thing to say about that is when you divide a clump, every single one of those tubers will give you an identical plant.
Right.
So it's a
Genetically.
like plant. Yes.
Yeah. So, okay. Yeah. Interesting. Yeah. It's interesting because like a lot of these principles are the same in the vegetable world, but typically you're not dealing with an underground tuber division. You're dealing with like maybe a stem propagation or something like that. Okay. So let's imagine I've either divided or not. However, I've decided to get my dahlias in the ground. I've got them out after my last frost date. What is my general care over the course of the season?
Well, there's a lot of steps
I'm
that we
sure.
probably
Yeah.
don't have time
I'm
to
sure.
cover
Yeah. Yeah.
today. I have a dahlia community where we walk side by side, so I grow with my community. But to help people get started today that are listening, once you have planted your tuber, sometimes if your ground is really wet, or I'm sorry, if it's really dry, you could water in the ground, but then you don't water your plants again until they start to emerge from the ground. If you start watering your tubers after planting them, they will likely rot until they have sprouted. Each tuber has all the nutrients it needs to get started. So I don't start watering my tubers until they have a couple inches of growth above the ground. And so that early stage, you're just kind of watching, you're putting some Sluggo Plus down so that the slugs can't eat your growth that's coming out of the
I
ground.
think that's a great product, honestly.
It is. It's the only chemical that I use in the garden.
A lot of people are averse to like the word chemical in general. And there are things that it's just like, if you look at the composition of it, if you look at the effect of it, it works.
It's the only thing that keeps the slugs off. You wouldn't have dahlias otherwise, at least where I am. We have
Yeah.
so many slugs.
Yeah.
So you put that down. Once you get your irrigation in place, once they start growing, turn that water on. Make sure, I do recommend that if you're not planting in rows, if you're planting in your garden, that you put like a tomato cage or some kind of staking system in the ground when you plant the tuber, because that tuber is going to start producing more tubers. And the last thing you want to do is put like a tomato cage down and then pierce those tubers after it's been planted and kill your plant. So you have your staking in place, you let it start growing. Once it's about 10 to 15 inches tall, you're going to pinch it at the third or fourth node. And what that's going to do is encourage your plant to be a bushier plant to give you even more blooms, because who doesn't want more flowers?
Right.
And then you're going to monitor your plant for pests. I don't use many chemicals. I use a foliar spray and I feed my plants a fertilizer throughout the season. And then you're going to enjoy those blooms. You're going to make bouquets. You're going to share those flowers. You're going to deadhead. And then towards the end of the season, you're going to increase the airflow by stripping the lower leaves. And then when the frost comes, or at the end of the season, when you need to put them to bed, for someone like you who doesn't get that frost, in November, December, you can cut the stalks back to the ground, give them a little bit of mulch, and tuck them away for the season. Or if you're like me, zones 7 and below, you need to dig your dahlia tubers and store them for the winter time.
And how do you store them? Like, because I could dig them up if I wanted to. And how would I store them so they don't rot over the season or whatever?
Yes, the best way to store them is if you have like a root cellar is a great way to store them. They need high humidity. So my dahlias get stored at a humidity of 85% at 42 degrees. You don't want your tubers to freeze. If your tubers freeze, they will turn to mush.
Right.
And if they're too warm, they're going to start growing again. So you can't just bring them in your house. You're going to have some very leggy plants start trying to grow. So 40 to 45 degrees is an ideal storage condition. And then there's different materials you can store them in.
Okay. Got it. Got it. Yeah, I might try it out this season just for fun, I guess, or if I want to change where I plant the dahlias, obviously, instead of having them come up in the exact same spot. But I'll have to let you know because some of them are starting to peak out. But I planted like maybe 50 clumps, and I definitely don't see 50 coming up. So it might be a time thing, or who knows, maybe some rotted over the course of, we had a very, very wet winter for us at least, and maybe something happened. But I did not really realize that it was practical, I suppose, to grow dahlias from seed. Like when we look at a fruit tree, an apple, a citrus, it's like one of those like you can, but you wouldn't type of things. And I didn't know that wasn't the case with dahlias.
You can certainly grow dahlias from seed. I have been hybridizing dahlias for the last 4 years, which means that I collect seeds from my plants and I grow them out in our field. It is an interesting process. If you are listening and you're like, ooh, I want to try growing a dahlia from seed, the thing that you need to know is that dahlias grown from seed are going to produce a brand new variety. So that means most of them grown from seed are going to be open-centered dahlias. So they're going to be great for the bees. The bees are going to love them, but they're likely going to have an open center, especially if they've been collected from a field that has any open-centered dahlias, meaning the dahlias where you see the big pollen in the center. Great for bringing pollinators to the garden, but those typically don't make great cut flowers because they have a short vase life. So if you're thinking, I'm going to start a flower farm and I'm going to buy all of mine from seed and grow them that way instead of tubers, you're going to have an assortment and you're not going to be able to promise anyone any specific flowers because you maybe have 1 or 2 unicorns in that mix.
I see. So it could maybe that could be your story, I guess, if you were really trying to go that route, is say let's kind of get what's grown. But yeah, so when you hybridize, are you using some of those like classic techniques where you're bagging the flower and making sure you know what's crossing?
So my very first season of trying to hybridize dahlias, I did try hand pollinating the dahlias. Unfortunately, we have a really unpredictable fall here where we can get a lot of rain and most of my hand crosses got wet and moldy, even with too much moisture with bags covering them. So I let the bees pollinate, but I'm very strategic. I will place dahlias next to each other whose characteristics I want. So for example, this last year, I was saving seeds to try and get a water lily dahlia. I don't know if I'll get them or not. I have about 200 of those seeds that are now growing in our grow room right now. But I planted water lily dahlias next to other water lily dahlias. And then I let the bees pollinate those. So I was very strategic with what I placed next to one another to try and get that. But it's like a kid at Christmas. You don't know what you're going to get. It's a surprise with every bloom.
Yeah. Yeah. That's so you're sort of operating under the logic of I'll put them close to one another. So it's the most likely thing to get crossed, even though it's not like technically, I guess, a guarantee since you're not doing it by hand.
Correct. And dahlias are octoploids, which means they have 8 sets of chromosomes from each parent.
Yeah. It's crazy.
So it's even if you hand pollinate, the odds of getting exactly what you're going for are very slim. So it's a numbers game. You have to have a lot of space to grow a lot. I grew 600 from seed last year.
Watch the full episode right here and subscribe for more new episodes every single week.